Thank you so much for making the time to be with us today, Meredith, and Helen as well. My name is Giovanna Gassage. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Chief Librarian, and welcome to today's Authors Talk, which of course is focusing on women in wildlife trafficking. So we're very excited to have the authors here with us today. Just briefly, Meredith, who is here with us now, is an associate professor at the Department of Geographical Sciences at the University of Maryland. And Helen, who we hope will be joining us shortly, is a lecturer in the Department of International and Comparative Law at the University of Nigeria. And I understand you have, in fact, crossed paths with you in ODC in the past as well. It is definitely a topic we are very, very interested in. I think without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and I will let you begin, Meredith.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all today. It's really exciting to have this chance. So when
hello, Helen. Our second author has just joined. Welcome. So I've just given Meredith the floor to begin the talk.
Wonderful. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Helen, do you want to take it away?
Our book title is Women and Wildlife Trafficking. We're looking at women and wildlife trafficking. Are they participants, perpetrators, or victims? Next slide. So in this book is born out of the research that we did at Michigan State University when I went there to do my postdoc under the sponsorship of Alliance for African Partnership. And Professor Meredith Gore happens to be my principal investigator. I work directly under her. So next slide, please. So what was the reason why we engaged in this venture? We noticed that our motivation was actually that there is a massive gap in scientific literature concerning women's involvement in wildlife trafficking. And we were also concerned that there's lack of evidence in understanding the problem, as well as lack of evidence in providing solution to the issue of wildlife trafficking. And knowing the women constitute almost half of the world population, it is a critical issue if we can just neglect so great an issue about women and how do they come into the picture as regards the issue of wildlife trafficking. So our collaboration began with a review of literature to identify the gap in knowledge. That took us almost 4 months. And along the line, COVID came up. We were doing in-depth interviews, which we traveled to some African countries and some other countries because it is our studies actually focused on sub-Saharan Africa. Then we also had an online survey during the COVID period. And these efforts yielded 2 principal journal articles, one still in the pipeline, some presentations, as well as the detailed book volume that we are talking about today. Next slide, please. Next slide. So from all these, from the literature review, we published a journal article where we identified the women, the gap in knowledge as regards the women involved, synthesis of literature of women involvement in wildlife trafficking, and the article in Frontiers in Conservation Science on mapping terrain, which is actually based on our online survey, where we examine the expert elicitation of women's roles in wildlife trafficking, then this book. Then while we were doing this work, we had some unanswered questions at the back of our mind. We were worried that what are the roles that women hold and why do they assume them? And who are these women that participate in wildlife trafficking? Why do women choose to participate in wildlife trafficking or efforts to combat it? What situations surround women in inclusion or exclusion from efforts to combat wildlife trafficking? And other work conditions are women differentially impacted by the act of wildlife trafficking, as well as the effort to mitigate it. So from these, we also profiled some research questions. Next slide, please. Some research questions where we now asked, what are actually the costs and benefits of women intervening along the line? Please, the slide is blank, I don't know why, but what are the costs and benefits of women intervening along the wildlife trafficking chain from the source transit to destination? Then we also ask this question, is women participation in wildlife trafficking and intervention necessary for we to have a program success? Then we also ask the question, do differences between women and men signal any differences in priorities or incentives to participate in efforts to reduce wildlife trafficking related risks to humans? Then we also ask, what are the key nuances of women's participation in poaching, trafficking, and selling illegal wildlife products, either directly or in supporting roles or as managers? So based on these research questions, we went about to do a research, both the in-depth interview based on and also the online survey. But we decided, especially as we got an invitation from Routledge, to look at the diverse voices of persons that are involved in this. Some of them were our research participants, some of them were experts. Wonderful. That we came across in the course of doing this work. Then we decided to put up this book. Which,
thanks, Sasha, and to Giovanna for that lovely invitation.
From Europe, we had voices from North America, we had voices from Africa, we had voices from America, and so on. And so, on the whole, we had about 11 chapters. The first chapter, the next slide, please. The first chapter was actually my work and that of my mentor, Professor Gore, where we looked at the issue of, we said that the roles of women in wildlife trafficking are mostly unknown, but they are not unknowable. Then why is this so? Then we had some cross-cutting themes that we used to look at this. And the next slide, we looked at women first, assume different roles in both their private and public lives. And we also note that that women sometimes are viewed as minoritized, as outsiders, and as sometimes minoritized. And we also see that women are sometimes treated as unique beings. We are actually unique, and some of the time. And how has this shaped our involvement, both in efforts to combat wildlife trafficking and also the principal crime? And that is why we're looking at whether women are actually participants, whether they are perpetrators, or whether they are actually victims. Some of the works then try to answer some of these questions. So, but the introductory part is where we gave the framework for this book. So in chapter 1, please go to the next slide. In chapter 2, actually, we also put up an extension of the literature review that we also did with Sydney Andrew, which we used the feminist political ecology to understand, a lens to understand or to explore the gender dimensions of wildlife trafficking. And using this, we looked at the fact that most literature lack explicit demographic analysis. Rather, they are based on insights about case studies. So the key themes that we looked at the next slide, the essentialist myth and the participation myth. What are we saying in essence? Do women really participate? Are there works that that have said, based on the feminist political ecology lines, are there some literature that have street women as being actual participants, as or are there some of them that are just there because so we profiled some gray literature as well as journal articles, and we use this to consider the lived experiences of women, and we looked at it and we said that this will help us to understand actually why women are involved in wildlife trafficking. So that is the literature review. Then the next chapter, which is next slide, please. The next chapter was a chapter written by chapter 3 by Jessica Graham, where we looked at women as being change agents in an effort to disrupt the illegal wildlife trafficking. Jessica used some existing data and looked at how women initiate, what motivates them, and how do they get involved in making a shift in the status quo. So we looked at the position of women in the social network, especially as regards persons that help to serve as a change agent. And Jessica identified that there are 4 types of change agents, how women get involved in disrupting the wildlife trafficking chain. I'm in slide number 12. Yes. So we find that some women are in conservation scientists, activists. Some women are also in policy-making positions where they also drive programs concerning efforts to combat wildlife trafficking. While some of them are involved in leadership and management positions, while some women are also involved directly in the field as rangers. In all these, she was trying to look at women as change agents that can actually help in disrupting illegal wildlife trafficking. It's an interesting work, and it's actually very interesting how she was able to identify how women can actually participate in efforts to disrupt illegal wildlife trafficking. Next slide, please. So we move to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is written by an author from North America, Mexico precisely, authors. So using feminist and green social justice perspectives to better understand the governance of wildlife trafficking in Mexico. So these they used Ines and her authors also looked at the issue of engender social justice. How does women feature in this, and how do women actually help in the governance of wildlife trafficking? So she looked at the issue of representation in efforts or in organizations that help in disrupting or in combating wildlife trafficking. Then how are women being recognized? Then how is gender redistribution taking place? And she used she looked at Senate representation from 1997 to 2021, Senate representation in environmental commissions, as well as chamber representation, gender representation in chambers in environmental commission within the same time frame of 1997 to 2001. And we find out that actually that there has been a lot of improvements in engaging women coming into environmental commissions and making their input, and these have been yielding fruitful results. So that is the work. Then another work is in chapter 5, which is based in Nigeria by Amelia Ngozi Odo. Please, next slide, please. This work examined the health implications of women involvement in wildlife trafficking in Nigeria. So using key informant interview, this work tried to look at the different aspects of impact on the health of women. Some of them on their social wellness, which has to do with their relationship with their family, friends, and community members. And also, she also looked at the physical wellness, which has to do with the direct impact on the body, appearance, or pain from defending or offending. For instance, there's one interview where a woman was saying that she actually have been, sometimes that engaging in these like bushmeat can also cause physical harm to women. So we find out that because of that, men are more involved in such activities. They also looked at the emotional wellness of women, the negative impacts they have on women, especially their mental health, which sometimes has to do with depression, fear, or not knowing. Sometimes I know that some of communicable diseases that we have had in time past were as a result of human interaction with wildlife, especially when we come to eat them. So this work is quite interesting in exposing the health implications of women involvement in wildlife trafficking. That was in chapter 5. So another work we found interesting also is in chapter 6, where an author from Cameroon looked at women involvement in wildlife crime and the issue of sustainable livelihood. And that work is actually very, very interesting because we also try to look at the observed roles of women in wildlife trafficking, as well as looking at the source point, the levels of involvement and the levels of criminal activities at the local, at the urban, as well as foreign. But was able to find out that you look at the issue of what are the roles of women in wildlife trafficking, and you see that women actually about 40% of them are involved in wildlife crime as a result of the fact that they are benefiting from it, beneficiaries, and this is because of lack of alternative livelihood. And some of them are also like about 30% involved as offenders. But you also try to look at the issue that they're actually being in that offending position, not because they actually want to commit crime, but because they see themselves as this happens to be the only alternative for me to survive. And I looked at the issue of observers, about 15% as observers, and very few, about 10% as defenders, and very minimal 5% as influencers and 0 as victims. So it's an interesting work that has to do because the issue of in places like Cameroon is the source point where some of these wildlife is being sourced before they are trafficked at both national and international level. So that's the work. So we looked at the daily channels of wildlife trafficking, the rural consumption, the urban consumption, as well as the trafficking across boundaries beyond Cameroon into other nations. So we go to chapter 7, which has to do with women in the rhino poaching conflict using feminist political ecology analysis. This was written by some authors from the UK based on the work they did in Mozambique and South Africa. So they looked at how women using the feminist political ecology. This slide is okay. Using the feminist political ecology, especially the 3 pillars of the feminist political ecology, to look at how women get involved in rhino poaching. Like it says, it looked at how the local gender relationship intersects with political economies of poaching and enforcement responses. It's also looked at the analysis of poaching and impacts on especially when the issue of militarized interventions in rhino poaching. How does it affect women? Then we also looked at analysis of the gendered experience of poaching economies and enforcement on the lives of women. So this work is also very revealing as regards where the area I actually found interesting is the issue of militarization of enforcement responses. How women are not just excluded from using this, but I also happen to be victim, because when some of these men poachers die, some of them are husbands to the women, some of them are breadwinners of families, and so on. But that is by the way. So we go to chapter 8, which is perception of indigenous Baka women. Please, next slide. Perceptions of indigenous Baka women, inclusion in wildlife conservation and exploitation. This was based on the work in the Cameroon also, and it's based on how women are included in conservation conservation activities in the Bopa Jah Biosphere Reserve in Cameroon, especially the Baka women. How are they included? It is based on an interview, which they interviewed about 300 participants. We also from about 10 villages out of 107 villages. And we saw that the perception of women inclusion in conservation activities have been such that the local voices are not actually being heard. But in those areas, they see women as not being very effective, but yet they recognize the fact that some of them are involved in activities at the local level at that biosphere, which has helped in time past in conservation activities being more effective. So with this work advocated for more inclusion of indigenous women in conservation activities. So in chapter 9, next slide please. In chapter 9 is a work based on Central African Republic, which has to do, please, next slide please, which has to do with, next slide. The work was written by Caroline Just and Just Robinson and some others, which has to do with shaping life. The title, Shaping Life in the Shadows, Gender Dimensions of Wildlife in Wildlife Economies and Intervention in Central African Republic. This one is based on ethnographic interviews, and it tries to look at the issue of equity and inclusivity of women, that women happen to be the ones working in the shadows, but yet they are not actually seen, but yet their actions and their interventions and their activities are very much visible. So I like the title, Shaping Life in the Shadows. So gender dimensions in wildlife economies in Central African Republic. So the issue of equity and inclusivity was very central to the work, and they discussed that in the ethnographic interviews, the limited ways that conservation policies and interventions influence the creation of shadowy spaces where women work, not only supporting family needs, but also cross boundaries beyond what is legal into illegal. So, which is very, very informative. So we go to the next work on chapter 10 that has to do with, which is a perspective from Europe by Professor Solund. He looked at gendered case file analysis of reptile trafficking and illegal keeping in Norway. A very interesting work that has to do with non-human animal, what are the gendered implications. And Professor Solund analyzed case files, reviewed some case files that have been there over the years, and also conducted some interviews. The case file analysis revealed that there are male motivations for reptile keeping and animal abuse and the breach of species justice. So you see that males are more given to reptile keeping and animal abuse. While in interviews, it showed women as having that ethic of care and tends towards keeping and caring for some of these charismatic species. Some of them get them, and not because they want to keep those animals for maybe because of the ethics of care and concern they have for these. So obviously in all is looking at the interaction of humans with non-human animal, using the language of Professor Solomon. So we looked at the gender dimensions of it, the male's motivation, as well as the women's ethics and concern for the care of these animals. So the final chapter is where we try to conclude by looking at bridging the gender, the knowledge action boundaries, which I'm sure my principal investigator is going to come in on this. But actually what we are looking at, what are the intentions to fill, we had the intention to fill in lacuna as a result of the gap in knowledge base. And we actually looked at discussing the inclusion, power governance, and power dynamics, especially as it regards to women. And we said that it is not just about research. I know that after we have done this research, a lot of other voices are coming up and conferences are coming up talking about women and gender dimensions of wildlife trafficking. We are glad to be part of the pioneering activities, but what we are saying is that the roles of women in wildlife trafficking should no longer be understudied by scientists or under-considered by policymakers, because if women constitute almost half of the population, they should be involved not just in the solution, and we should also note their involvement in the actual crime. Thank you very much. Hello.
Thank you, Helen. Now, really, really interesting and such a comprehensive approach to looking. I mean, it's very international in scope, and you've looked at various lenses from the political ecology, feminist political ecology, to doing the ethnographic studies. Now, I really find this is a really nice addition to what we need to know about in terms of women and wildlife trafficking. So thank you so much. Meredith, did you want to add something before I open the floor for questions?
No, I mean, no, thank you. And I'm just really appreciative of Helen walking us through the kind of collaboration in general, and then also our edited volume. So hopefully there are some questions and we can work to try to answer them.
Wonderful. Well, colleagues, feel free to either use the chat or to raise your hand if you have questions. I actually wanted you to expand a bit more. In the first chapter, you talked about women being viewed in three ways near cross-cutting issues. And one of them was being viewed as unique beings. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that concept of what exactly you mean by unique beings.
I didn't get the question.
Oh, I was wondering.
I can try to answer that question. So the question, Helen, was in chapter 1, how we make a summary statement about women being viewed as unique beings some of the time, right? Okay. And so I think it was really interesting to see how in some of the research that is profiled by the different authors, there is this idea of thinking about women as being separate from men and being unique in their interactions with wildlife and unique in their solutions, but not all the time. I think that was something that's interesting, and I think it's a theme that recurred again and again, is that it's useful to distinguish women as being from men, but then also at times it's good to lump them together. And I think if you can't gender disaggregate your data, you can't explore this issue at all. And that gets back to that closing point that Helen just had, which is that, you know, women are half of the problem, but we're also half of the solution. So if you can't think about women as being, you know, individuals and being separate from men, then you can't think of them as also being part of it. I don't know if that helps, or if you have anything else to say about that, Helen. Possibly not.
Am I supposed to respond to this?
No, I think it was okay.
No, thank you. No, I was just, you know, I was curious by that phrase, unique being. So that's why I wanted a bit more information about that. But I think it's a really nice way of capturing, you know, the uniqueness, and then, you know, talking about, as you mentioned, having to think separately and together at the same time.
Yeah, I think that it's important to, you know, sometimes we think about women as being exceptional, right? And so they need to be thought about in a separate way. There might be instances where women are perceived as having preferential treatment or particularly chivalrous, or women are sanctioned, you know, receive harsher sentences or lighter sentences, right? And so I think we can tend to think about women in a particular way, and we think about women as being unique in like context specific instances. And this uniqueness creates pressures for the special handling of women sometimes. You know, when you think about women as being unique, as having particular roles or particular occupations, this means that women have special skills, and this creates a woman as unique approach. And if you deviate from being unique, then that can make you stand out and make you be viewed as immoral or corrupt or hysterical or manipulative or something. And so I think it's, you know, this theme kind of comes up again and again in the book, in the different chapters, where sometimes women are unique in their ability to serve as agents of change, but then in other instances, you know, you need to be thinking about the roles of women in the larger social context, like in the experience of, you know, the Central African Republic, where there's been lots of political changes and economic changes. So it's just something, a theme I think that cuts across many of the chapters.
No, definitely. And as you mentioned, there's also the whole gender stereotyping,
yep.
Which plays into that. And I think the unique idea tries to counter a lot of that stereotyping as well.
Yeah, so if women are unique, then when women are not unique, it puts pressure on them to sort of behave in this singular way. And if you deviate from that, then there can be social repercussions. And I think it's in chapter 5 where we talk, you know, where one of the authors talks about, you know, the gender dimensions of mental health and social health and physical health that can kind of come with those pressures. So yeah, it's worth talking about more, I think. So thanks for bringing that up.
No, absolutely. Thank you for addressing this. Helen, I'm just curious, can you hear us okay? I'm a little concerned that you might not have the best audio at your end.
Yes, you can see I'm straining to hear most of the things that are being said, and I've tuned up the volume, but when I tune it up, it's kind of breaking. So I tune it down again, but I'm straining to hear, to understand what is being said. Is there any question directed at me that I needed to comment on? We're talking about the issue of stereotyping. So we know the issue of, especially for some of us here in Africa, how women are usually kind of put in a mold as a result of, you know, social norms, the way we see ourselves, not just ourselves, the way men also see us. So sometimes it tends to put us in a particular mold that we are supposed to behave in a particular way. For instance, the issue of wildlife crime, for instance, in Nigeria, where you find out that women are mostly involved in the sale, not in the actual harvesting of these animals. But if there is no sale, there won't be the harvest. If there are no, what do I call it? If there's no demand, there won't be supply. Okay, so our own interest in this research is that these diverse or gendered dimensions of the issue of wildlife trafficking is something that is supposed to be tackled holistically so that it can help the program that is being designed to tackle illegal wildlife trade, to be successful. And we looked at cost. You can see one of the research questions we put forward. We talked about the costs and benefits. One of our writers from Cameroon was actually talking about how because of livelihood options that are limited for the women, that is why we finding themselves in the wildlife crime arena. But that is not excusable, because the issue of combating wildlife trafficking is something that should be looked at holistically, not just by in research as well as by practitioners, so that we capture the motivations, we capture the things that can be done to reduce certain genders from being involved in this. And we also looked at like we're talking about stereotyping. They work in, I think they work in Mozambique by Francis Mercer. They were talking about militarization, how it affected women. Some of them, especially in Kenya, when I was doing an interview, we found out that they militarized their enforcement paradigm, and they excluded some women as saying that they cannot carry some equipment. Okay. So that is a way of excluding them in the enforcement process. So and also the effects of the militarization also causes some deaths, and disrupts also family units, and women bear the brunt. So in the whole of this work, we are looking at what are the effects on women, how when they participate, when they are the actual perpetrators, when they participate, some of them may be forced into the trafficking, for instance, not because they want it, but because they do not have alternative livelihood, like the work in Cameroon was talking about. Then we also look at women have also, like I said, they are unique. They work in Baka, women in inclusion, perception. You look at some of them looking at women as people that should not be involved in conservation. But along the line, as we were doing this interview, we found out that women actually has a lot to give when it has to do with conservation practices. So these issues are things that should be captured, and we cannot afford to neglect any aspects of the gender if we're looking at having a holistic approach to the issue of combating wildlife trafficking. So women have a lot to give when it has to do. We're not just looking at it, because I know when we're doing interview, one of my participants was saying, are we trying to demonize women as being criminals? I said, that is the least of our intention, but we are looking at it dispassionately. Are women involved in this crime? And if they are, how can we get them out of it? And can women also be involved in the defending rules? How can they also, if they're observers, if they're influencers, how can we utilize these experiences to ensure that we have program success? That's just the essence of it, and we try to look at it from different background and from different aspects. We are not actually, when we're doing the work, we wanted to look at, we cannot go species specific, but we're looking at wildlife trafficking in general. Though some of them eventually ended up like the one in by Solund that looked at reptile keeping, how men happen to be the one that are abusing these animals, the one that have the motivation, that have the violence to keep it, while women have that nature to keep them as a charismatic species to be cared for. So we look at these two extremes, and these are something that can be harvested to ensure that we have a good program success in intervention.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you have, as authors of this book, received any feedback in terms of potential policy changes in some of the countries where your authors are coming from, whether or not you've managed to successfully influence some of those things in terms of expanding their lens to be more inclusive when they think about the issues and actually develop policy around wildlife trafficking. So I was just, it might be too soon. I know the book is still pretty recent, but I was curious if you'd had any feedback in that area.
Okay. Helen, have you heard anything? Go ahead.
Okay, I have not heard anything, but I had the opportunity of interacting with Solon while we were in Spain for the program. Solon, the one that wrote on reptile trafficking. So she has also gotten a grant by government to actually to put forward her research, which will be used for program intervention. She has gotten a grant where the government of Norway has asked her to analyze case files of trafficking for some number of years. And the essence of it is to factor in these gender perspectives, because actually when she was saying that she never adverted her mind on the issue of the gender dimension of it, that it was good that we mentioned it, so that in her analysis of this case files, she now started looking at the gender, the dimensions of this. So I believe that that one can also be, but for others, I've not heard any responses. Some of these researches are yet in print, and I believe that even this, that is why I was happy for this program, that it will also help to bring it, because I know UNODC is in many countries. So it will also help to bring this to the tables of government to look at the issues on the table, and they can also factor it in designing programs and interventions in the future.
No, absolutely. And as you might be aware, UNODC is also very involved in trying to gender mainstream our programs. So I think your book is very timely for us and very welcome, because we also have I think we've been making great progress, and I know some of our substantive staff here from UNODC can speak more to that, but it's always good to have more ammunition in our toolkit through works like yours. So I think we're very grateful for it.
I'll just add,
please.
The Environment for Justice, or the E4J, the Education for Justice Initiative. Helen and I have both had an opportunity to work through that, and then also with the UNODC Forest and Wildlife Crime Group. And so we've been able to share our results, and I know that those results have been read as there's been different programming and funding and things like that in South America and elsewhere. And so it's been pretty, I think, amazing on I'll just speak for me, to be able to know that the volume and the voices of the authors are being considered in conversations and informing conversations is pretty amazing. So that's been really neat. And then also being able to make these linkages with the E4J contacts that we've made over time. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. Colleagues, do you have any questions? I'm seeing nobody's using the chat, but please also feel free to raise your hands if you have questions. Sometimes they're quiet. Well, I think if we don't have any more questions, then I think we can wrap up. I really want to thank you both for making the time to be with us, for presenting this book. Colleagues, we have the book, whoops, my background's gonna block it out. We have it in print, and we also have it in ebook format. For members of the permanent missions, you of course do have borrowing privileges and can borrow it for a month at a time. But yes, thank you so much, and I wish you all the best of luck with your future endeavors. And I am really excited to see what future research you do on this topic, because I think we all are, because I think it's a really important thing to explore. And I'm very excited about having more discussion about women in these various crime fields and whatnot. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. And I can put my email in the chat if people are interested in following up, or if they can't access the articles. I know you have amazing library privileges where you are, but just in case, I'm happy to try to share. Yeah, and I just want to say thank you again to Helen for all the amazing leadership that you've offered in this space. It's just incredibly impressive, and I miss you, and I hope I see you soon in person.
Me too. Me too. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. And Helen, really well done. It's a very impressive work to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meredith. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Colleagues, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah. So, am I permitted to exit?